Hollywood has always presented action heroes as untouchable forces of nature, fearless icons who stride across burning landscapes, leap from impossible heights, and survive battles no ordinary human could endure. But behind the glamour, behind the marketing campaigns and the carefully edited sound bites, lies a truth that rarely reaches the public. Many of the actors who defined entire generations of action cinema secretly resented the very roles that made them legends. Their performances looked effortless, yet the emotional weight behind them was anything but. Studios polished every frame to perfection, reinforcing the illusion that these stars were born for the characters they portrayed. But beneath the surface, dissatisfaction simmered. Some actors felt creatively suffocated, trapped inside worlds shaped more by corporate ambition than artistic purpose. Others struggled with the physical demands, the pressure of enormous franchises, or the mental exhaustion of embodying personas they never fully connected with. And still others carried private frustrations, resentment towards scripts they disliked, tension with directors, or the overwhelming fear that a single misstep could collapse their careers. This episode peels back the velvet curtain to reveal the quiet turmoil behind films adored worldwide. It uncovers the hidden battles waged in trailers, rehearsal rooms, and late-night conversations far from the public eye. These stories remind us that even the strongest heroes on screen can be drowning inside roles they wish they had never taken. Yet, despite their internal struggles, they delivered performances so powerful that audiences never suspected the truth. Tonight, we delve into 15 action movies whose stars wore their characters like armor, all while fighting personal wars no camera ever captured. Welcome to the unseen world behind the legends, where admiration and misery walk hand in hand. Fact 1. Blade. Trinity 2004. Wesley Snipes and a franchise that slipped away from the moment production began. On Blade, Trinity, Wesley Snipes sensed that something fundamental had shifted. The franchise he had helped build, one defined by grit, discipline, and a sharp creative vision, was now being pulled in a direction he no longer recognized. The studio wanted a lighter tone, new characters, and a broader comedic edge. Snipes, who had always approached Blade with methodical seriousness, felt his character was being diluted for commercial convenience. That frustration quickly grew into quiet hostility. On set, Snipes grew increasingly withdrawn. Crew members recalled that he communicated through short notes, rarely broke character, and frequently isolated himself in his trailer. It wasn't ego, it was a sense of betrayal. He believed the film no longer respected the mythology he had embodied for years. Scenes that once showcased Blade's intensity now emphasized humor from supporting characters, pushing Snipes into the background of a story built around him. The imbalance weighed heavily on him. Compounding the tension were creative disputes with the director, whom Snipes felt failed to understand the tone that made the first two films resonate. Arguments erupted, schedules slipped, and production spiraled into disarray. In several moments, Snipes refused to perform, takes he believed contradicted Blade's established personality, forcing the crew to rely on doubles and digital fixes. While the final film presented a cohesive hero stalking vampires through neon-lit corridors, the truth behind the curtain was far less unified. When Blade, Trinity finally released, Snipes remained distant, offering little enthusiasm in its aftermath. For him, the role he once championed had transformed into a reminder of lost creative control. What audiences celebrated as another chapter of a beloved anti-hero felt, to Snipes, like the final unraveling of a character he had fought hard to protect. Fact 2. Mad Max. Fury Road, 2015. Tom Hardy's reluctant descent into chaos. During the blistering months of filming Mad Max, Fury Road, Tom Hardy carried a growing unease that shadowed every moment of production. The film was shot in extreme conditions, far from traditional studio environments, and directed through a process Hardy struggled to decipher. George Miller's vision relied heavily on visuals, stunts, and instinct rather than conventional dialogue or detailed explanations. For an actor who thrived on clarity, Hardy felt perpetually unmoored, performing scenes without fully understanding their emotional trajectory. Hardy's frustration intensified as the shoot expanded far beyond original expectations. Dust storms halted production, massive rigs broke down, and action sequences demanded endless resets. Meanwhile, tension brewed between Hardy and Charlize Theron. Their characters' distrust spilled into their interactions off-camera, creating a charged atmosphere that mirrored the film's relentless energy. Hardy felt lost in a narrative he couldn't fully grasp. Watching Theron anchor the story while he struggled to locate Max's internal compass within the chaos. Communication with Miller often proved challenging. Hardy repeatedly voiced concerns, seeking direction or clarity, yet Miller's answers remained cryptic. The more the director asked Hardy to trust his process, the more Hardy doubted the film's coherence. He feared that the sprawling spectacle would overshadow character depth and leave Max feeling like a secondary presence in his own story. Yet, when the final cut premiered, Hardy was stunned. The raw footage he had doubted became a masterpiece of operatic action. Recognizing his misjudgment, he publicly apologized to Miller, admitting that his frustration stemmed from not seeing the bigger picture. For audiences, Hardy delivered a stoic, feral survivor battling through a wasteland. For Hardy, the role was a journey marked by confusion, impatience, and a humility he gained only after witnessing the film's brilliance. Fact 3. The Bourne Ultimatum, 2007. Matt Damon and the script he couldn't stand. By the time The Bourne Ultimatum entered pre-production, Matt Damon felt an uneasy dread settling in. Early drafts of the screenplay were disjointed, confusing, and wildly disconnected from the grounded intelligence that defined the first two films. Damon, who had grown deeply protective of Jason Bourne, believed the material was unworthy of the franchise. His disappointment cut deep. He feared the third installment would unravel everything the series had built. Damon spoke openly about his frustration, calling the initial script a disaster that lacked thematic purpose. The tension escalated between him and the studio as rewrites piled up, pushing production closer to its deadline. Damon considered walking away entirely, convinced that the film would collapse under the weight of its structural flaws. Only after extensive intervention with new writers, reshaping key sequences, did the script begin to resemble something salvageable. Even then, Damon's skepticism remained. Filming was a marathon of precision and exhaustion. The intense action choreography demanded grueling physicality, while last-minute page changes left Damon scrambling to understand Bourne's emotional state from scene to scene. He approached the role with commitment, but the instability behind the scenes left him drained. He often expressed concern that the film relied too heavily on spectacle at the expense of Bourne's psychological nuance. Despite his internal struggle, Damon delivered a taut, compelling performance. His portrayal of a man piecing together fragments of his identity resonated powerfully with audiences. Yet privately, Damon viewed the experience as one of the most stressful chapters of his career. While the film became a critical triumph, Damon remembered the chaos, the creative clashes, and the despair he felt when confronted with a script that nearly ended Bourne's journey before it began. Fact 4. Batman v Superman, 2016. Ben Affleck and the cape that became a weight. When Ben Affleck accepted the role of Batman, he envisioned a complex, wounded figure shaped by years of loss and moral ambiguity. What he didn't anticipate was the crushing scrutiny that followed. Before a single frame was shot, the internet exploded with ridicule, petitions, and late-night jokes mocking his casting. Affleck tried to remain unfazed, but the hostility carved into him long before he stepped into the suit. That pressure shadowed every rehearsal, every costume fitting, and every day on set. Filming itself proved no easier. The Batman suit was physically punishing, restricting movement and trapping heat during marathon shoots. Affleck pushed through discomfort, but the real struggle was emotional. As the production grew increasingly chaotic with shifting tones, studio interference, and looming universe-building expectations, Affleck felt himself slipping into a darker headspace. Public pressure blended with creative frustration, leaving him questioning whether he could carry the burden of such an iconic role. Then came the promotional tour. While Sitting beside Henry Cavill during the infamous interview, Affleck's silent, distant expression became a viral meme. Sad Affleck. The world laughed, but beneath that stillness was a man grappling with exhaustion and private battles. Affleck later admitted that the role and the surrounding turbulence contributed to a relapse in his long fight against alcoholism. The character he hoped would represent artistic redemption instead deepened his struggle. Though Affleck delivered a powerful, brooding Batman, the performance cost him more than audiences realized. Behind the cowl was a man stretched to his limit, physically strained, emotionally drained, and artistically conflicted. When he eventually stepped away from the role, it wasn't out of disinterest, but out of survival. Batman had become a weight he could no longer carry. Fact 5. Lara Croft. Tomb Raider 2001. Angelina Jolie and the heroine she couldn't believe in. Angelina Jolie stepped into the role of Lara Croft at a time when her career was defined by raw, emotionally charged performances. But Lara Croft, stylized, glossy, and engineered for mass-market appeal, felt foreign to her instincts as an actress. Jolie admired the physical challenge. Yet the character's superficial construction left her yearning for depth the script never provided. From the start, she sensed that Croft's world revolved more around spectacle than storytelling. Training for the role consumed months of her life. Jolie learned weapons handling, acrobatics, and rigorous martial arts, pushing her body to extremes. But the more she transformed physically, the less she connected emotionally. Lara Croft was written as a charismatic adventurer, yet Jolie found the character hollow, shaped by aesthetics rather than humanity. Promotional materials emphasized body image and action poses, elements Jolie felt reinforced a version of femininity she didn't want to represent. Complicating the experience, Jolie was privately navigating personal turmoil. Her life at the time was chaotic, and the demanding international shoot left her with little space to breathe. She performed the stunts with fierce intensity, but internally she felt detached from a role that never aligned with her artistic goals. The movie's tone, sleek, heightened, and commercially polished, contrasted sharply with the grounded emotional role she preferred. By the time the sequel arrived, she agreed to return but remained ambivalent. Once filming wrapped, Jolie made it clear she was done with the franchise. For audiences, Lara Croft became an early 2000s action icon. For Jolie, the role was a mask she wore convincingly, but without affection, a reminder of a character she played with commitment, yet never truly believed in. Fact 6. Spectre 2015. Daniel Craig and the Spy Who Drained Him. Daniel Craig had redefined James Bond with grit, vulnerability, and emotional realism. But by the time filming began on Spectre, the wear of 4 Bond movies had carved deep into it. Years of extreme stunt work left his body battered, torn knee ligaments, chronic joint pain, and mounting injuries that required surgery, yet allowed little recovery time. As production ramped up, Craig found himself performing physically punishing scenes while barely healed, each movement sending sharp reminders of how much he'd sacrificed for the role. The pressure was equally intense off-screen. After the massive success of Skyfall, expectations skyrocketed. The studio pushed for a bigger spectacle, more emotional stakes, and a storyline tying together Craig's entire Bond era. Craig, already exhausted, struggled with the weight of delivering another monumental entry. He admired Bond but felt imprisoned by the character's emotional isolation, a man defined by loneliness, violence, and suppressed vulnerability. Living inside that psyche year after year drained him. The script evolved constantly, with rewrites continuing deep into production. Scenes shifted, motivations changed, and Craig often found himself navigating emotional beats without clear direction. He approached each moment professionally, but internally he was burning out. When filming wrapped, his now famous declaration, "I'd rather slash my wrists than play Bond again," shocked the world. Yet it reflected genuine exhaustion rather than melodrama. Though Craig later returned for No Time to Die, Spectre marked the point where Bond became not a career-defining opportunity but a burden he could barely endure. Audiences saw a suave, unstoppable spy. Craig remembered pain, fatigue, and the crushing sense that he was giving more of himself than he could afford. Fact 7. Speed 21997. Sandra Bullock and the sequel she never wanted. When Sandra Bullock agreed to return as Annie Porter in Speed 2, she did so not out of passion, but because another project she cared about depended on her participation. From the moment she stepped onto the cruise ship set, she sensed the heartbeat that made the original Speed exhilarating had vanished. Gone was the gritty tension, the grounded stakes, the electric chemistry with Keanu Reeves. In its place stood a clumsy, overblown sequel that misunderstood everything audiences loved about the first film. Bullock approached the role with commitment, yet every day reinforced her doubts. The script felt hollow, the pacing sluggish, and the action sequences lacked urgency. Annie, once a relatable, spirited woman thrown into chaos, had become a caricature navigating forced comedy in a sluggish maritime disaster. Bullock pushed through scene after scene, but privately she worried the film was drifting toward catastrophe. The production itself was plagued with logistical nightmares. Shooting on a massive ship created relentless delays, technical failures, and exhausting resets. Bullock tried to keep morale steady, but the overwhelming sense that the film was fundamentally off track never left her. Even promotional interviews became uncomfortable as she struggled to express enthusiasm for a project she didn't believe in. After its release and its critical collapse, Bullock openly acknowledged her regret. She admitted she disliked the film and wished she had trusted her instincts. Yet, despite the disappointment, she delivered a professional performance, anchoring a flawed sequel with as much sincerity as she could. Audiences saw Bullock smiling through chaotic action. She remembered a project she endured rather than embraced. Fact 8. Alien. Resurrection. 1997. Winona Ryder and the character she couldn't understand. Winona Ryder joined Alien. Resurrection with enthusiasm for the franchise's legacy, hoping to explore its psychological and existential themes. But as filming progressed, she found herself inside a film that bore little resemblance to the atmospheric dread that defined Alien. Her character, Call a mysterious synthetic with rebellious tendencies, was written with contradictions that left Ryder confused about her emotional core. The more she performed, the more she struggled to locate Call's authentic voice. The tone of the movie further complicated her experience. Director Jean-Pierre Jeunet infused the film with surreal, quirky energy that clashed with Ryder's expectations. Scenes veered into exaggerated territory, blending grotesque visuals with comedic undertones that felt alien to the franchise's identity. Ryder often voiced her concerns, but the stylistic direction was already locked into place. As the narrative grew stranger, so did her disconnection from the character. Ryder admired Sigourney Weaver deeply, yet even Weaver acknowledged the film's chaotic essence. Between the bizarre creature concepts, unconventional dialogue, and tonal inconsistency, Ryder felt trapped in a story that didn't know whether it wanted to thrill, horrify, or parody itself. Each action sequence pushed her further into uncertainty, forcing her to rely on instinct rather than clear motivation. Though she delivered a thoughtful performance, Ryder later admitted she never fully understood what Alien Resurrection was trying to achieve. Audiences saw a mysterious android fighting to save humanity. Ryder remembered feeling lost, performing in a film whose emotional logic slipped through her fingers at every turn. Fact 9. Red Sonja, 1985. Arnold Schwarzenegger and the film he tried to hide. Arnold Schwarzenegger entered Red Sonja under the impression that his role would be small, a brief appearance to support the film's heroine. But as production unfolded, he realized the studio intended to exploit his rising fame by drastically expanding his screen time. The script was rewritten, scenes were added, and suddenly Schwarzenegger found himself functioning as an unofficial co-lead in a movie he never intended to shape. His irritation grew quickly. The shoot itself was riddled with challenges. The sets felt cheap, the action choreography clumsy, and the dialogue painfully stiff. Schwarzenegger, who had begun to take his craft increasingly seriously, felt the film undermined the mythic tone established in his Conan movies. He clashed privately with creative decisions, believing the story lacked coherence and authenticity. days stretched into weeks, he found himself trapped in a role he disliked, surrounded by spectacle that felt more theatrical than epic. Behind the scenes, he expressed humor-laced frustration, joking years later that the movie was so bad he used it as punishment for his children. His laughter masked genuine regret. Schwarzenegger remained courteous on set, but the sense of disappointment was palpable. He understood how easily one misguided project could derail momentum, and Red Sonja seemed poised to do exactly that. Though the film eventually gained cult curiosity, Schwarzenegger's experience remained defined by annoyance and disbelief. Audiences saw a sword-wielding warrior aiding a legendary heroine. Schwarzenegger remembered a project he wanted to escape, one that expanded his presence against his will, leaving him frustrated long before the cameras stopped rolling. Fact 10. The Mummy, 2017. Tom Cruise and the monster universe that crumbled around him. Tom Cruise stepped into The Mummy with the promise of launching Universal's ambitious dark universe, a cinematic world built to rival Marvel's empire. But from the earliest days of production, the film's identity shifted constantly, twisting itself around Cruise's star power in ways that left even him uneasy. He respected discipline, structure, and clear narrative direction. Yet The Mummy became a maze of rewrites, tonal confusion, and clashing creative agendas. Cruise was known for his hands-on approach, but here, his influence grew out of necessity rather than ego. He felt the character lacked depth. The mythology felt unfocused, and the story struggled to justify the universe it was meant to build. As Cruise redesigned scenes and restructured character arcs, Cruise found himself fighting to shape a coherent film from pieces that never quite fit. Each attempt to refine his character's motivations only highlighted how unstable the foundation truly was. And then came the stunts. Cruise, ever committed, performed the majority himself, including the notoriously grueling zero-gravity airplane sequence. The scene required multiple takes inside a steep-diving aircraft, leaving cast and crew shaken and physically drained. Though visually impressive, the stunt symbolized the broader struggle. Immense effort poured into a film, losing its compass. Behind closed doors, Cruise felt the exhaustion of pushing a project that seemed determined to resist coherence. By the time the film released to scathing reviews, Cruise bore far more blame than he deserved. His professionalism never wavered, yet emotionally, he had detached long before the final cut. Audiences saw a blockbuster star racing through ancient tombs and supernatural chaos. Cruise remembered a labyrinth of compromises, fatigue, and a cinematic universe collapsing before it ever began. Fact 11. Street Fighter 1994. Jean-Claude Van Damme and the production he couldn't control. When Jean-Claude Van Damme signed on to play Colonel Guile in Street Fighter, he expected a straightforward action role, military bravado, tight choreography, and disciplined combat. Instead, he entered a production spiraling into absurdity. The script leaned heavily into camp. Far removed from the high-intensity martial arts films that defined his career, Van Damme struggled to reconcile his vision of Guile as a stoic soldier with the exaggerated tone the studio demanded. The disconnect seeded frustration from the very start. Privately, Van Damme was battling a cocaine addiction that consumed an alarming portion of his time, energy, and money. His erratic behavior caused constant delays, forcing the crew to rearrange schedules around his unpredictable availability. Scenes were rewritten to minimize his presence, not because he lacked ability, but because he simply wasn't there. His absence placed enormous pressure on the rest of the cast and fractured the production's rhythm. Van Damme also bristled at the choreography. Instead of showcasing the precision and discipline that made him famous, the sequences were broad, cartoonish, and lacking the realism he valued. Each exaggerated punch and stylized kick deepened his dissatisfaction. He openly argued about creative choices, attempting to inject seriousness into a project that was never meant to take itself seriously. Though he completed the film, Van Damme later reflected on the experience with a mixture of embarrassment and regret. Street Fighter stands as a chaotic entry in his career, a film born from misaligned expectations and personal turmoil, audiences saw a confident Guile rallying troops to save the world. Van Damme remembered a role he never controlled, a production unraveling, and a version of himself he wished he could leave behind. Fact 12. Judge Dredd, 1995. Sylvester Stallone and the helmet he refused to wear. Sylvester Stallone approached Judge Dredd hoping to build a new action franchise, one grounded in the dark, uncompromising tone of the original comics. But almost immediately, he realized the studio had other plans. Instead of exploring dystopian severity, executives pushed for a lighter, more commercial tone, blending action with broad humor. Stallone watched the script drift further from the comic's essence, and with every draft, his enthusiasm dimmed. One of the most controversial decisions was his refusal to keep Dredd's helmet on. In the comics, the judge never removes it, preserving his mythic, faceless authority. Stallone felt audiences needed to see the star behind the character, a choice that angered longtime fans and highlighted the widening rift between comic authenticity and studio demands. That decision became symbolic of the entire production, a constant tug of war between artistic purity and marketable compromise. On set, Stallone encountered characters and visual designs he considered overly cartoonish. He questioned dialogue, challenged plot logic, and pushed for tonal corrections, but the film's direction was already cemented. Action sequences lacked the grit he envisioned, and emotional beats were drowned out by comedic interjections. Each day reinforced his belief that Judge Dredd was slipping beyond salvage. After release, Stallone spoke candidly about his disappointment, calling the film a missed opportunity. He didn't shy away from admitting that many creative choices, including his own, had undermined its potential. Audiences saw futuristic weapons, towering cities, and an armored lawman delivering explosive justice. Stallone remembered a project defined by compromise, clashing visions, and a character he could never fully inhabit. Fact 13. Elektra, 2005. Jennifer Garner and the contract that cornered her. Jennifer Garner entered Elektra not with excitement, but with resignation. Bound by a contractual obligation from Daredevil, she found herself returning to a character she felt had never been properly developed. Elektra, a figure known in comics for her tragic complexity, was here reduced to a stylized assassin in a story that struggled to balance mysticism, emotion, and action. Garner sensed early that the script lacked coherence, offering little space to explore Elektra's inner turmoil. Training for the role required intense physical preparation. Garner threw herself into martial arts drills, weapons work, and acrobatic routines, determined to at least honor the physicality of the character. But even as her skills sharpened, her emotional connection weakened. Scenes shifted without clear motivation. Dialogue felt stiff, and the mystical elements meant to deepen Elektra's mythology often came across as disjointed. She performed each moment with discipline, yet internally questioned the purpose behind them. Production days blurred into long hours of choreography changes, reshoots, and script tweaks that did little to strengthen the narrative. Crew members later recalled that Garner remained unfailingly professional, though her frustration showed in quieter moments. She wanted to give Elektra depth and dignity, but every creative obstacle made that goal harder to reach. Instead of a grounded character study, she found herself navigating a film pulled in too many directions. After release, Garner distanced herself from the project, openly acknowledging that Elektra was not a film she would have chosen. Fans saw a deadly warrior clad in crimson, fighting demons both literal and figurative. Garner remembered a role she fulfilled out of obligation, a character she fought for, but could never fully bring to life. Fact 14. Catwoman, 2004. Halle Berry in the role she refused to defend. Halle Berry accepted Catwoman at a pivotal moment in her career. Fresh off an Academy Award, and searching for bold, empowering roles, what she encountered instead was a production so misaligned with the character's legacy that she soon felt trapped inside a creative misfire. This Catwoman bore almost no resemblance to the iconic Selina Kyle. Instead, she existed in a disjointed narrative filled with exaggerated villains, implausible plot points, and stylistic choices that clashed wildly with Barry's instincts. From the outset, Barry struggled to connect with the material. The script felt thin, the dialogue awkward, and the direction inconsistent. Despite rigorous physical training, the choreography often leaned into campy spectacle rather than the sleek, feline elegance Barry envisioned. As she donned the revealing leather costume and performed scenes that felt increasingly absurd, Barry's doubt deepened. She sensed the film drifting toward territory far removed from the character's potential. Barry maintained her dedication, but behind the scenes, she questioned whether the performance could be salvaged by sheer effort. She pushed for emotional nuance, yet the film prioritized visual flash over character depth. Even promotional duties required her to champion a project she privately believed was unsalvageable. The disconnect between what Catwoman could have been and what the film became weighed heavily on her. When Catwoman was met with critical scorn, Barry confronted it with remarkable candor. She attended the Razzie Awards in person, accepting the Worst Actress trophy with humor, a moment that confirmed how deeply she disliked the experience. Audiences saw a stylized anti-heroine prowl through neon-lit streets. Barry remembered a role that failed her, one she chose to laugh at publicly because defending it felt impossible. Fact 15. X-Men: The Last Stand, 2006. Hugh Jackman and the Wolverine. He barely recognized Hugh Jackman had spent years shaping Wolverine into a character defined by emotional scars, internal conflict, and feral intensity, but X-Men: The Last Stand shifted direction abruptly, prioritizing spectacle over character. The departure of Bryan Singer and the accelerated production timeline left Jackman navigating a story that felt rushed and overstuffed. Wolverine, once the franchise's emotional anchor, was suddenly thrust into a plot dominated by explosions and rapid-fire twists. Jackman felt the script diluted the character's depth. Key emotional arcs, especially the tragic connection between Wolverine and Jean Grey, were compressed into brief scenes, stripping them of nuance. Action sequences grew larger and louder, but the emotional heart that Jackman valued seemed to evaporate. He voiced concerns privately, but with the production moving at breakneck speed, little could be adjusted. Physically, the role pushed him harder than ever. The fight choreography demanded relentless training, yet the pace left minimal recovery time. Jackman performed through exhaustion, carrying the film's momentum even when he felt disconnected from Wolverine's emotional truth. Each day reminded him that the character he cherished was being reshaped into something more generic, less haunted, less human. Though The Last Stand succeeded commercially, Jackman later expressed disappointment, calling the film a missed opportunity. It wasn't until Logan, years later, that he felt he finally restored the Wolverine he lost. Fans saw claws, rage, and raw power. Jackman remembered a performance fought under the weight of creative compromise, the moment where Wolverine's soul nearly disappeared behind the spectacle. Bonus fact: Die Hard, 1988. Bruce Willis and the role he feared would end him before. It saved him. Before Die Hard became a benchmark of modern action cinema, Bruce Willis entered the production with a sense of dread rather than excitement. At the time, he was known primarily for light comedic roles on television, and the world was loudly skeptical about his leap into action stardom. Headlines mocked the casting. Industry critics questioned the studio's judgment, and audiences dismissed him before seeing a single frame. The backlash cut deeply, planting seeds of insecurity that grew throughout filming. The physical demands of the role quickly intensified. That insecurity, Willis performed exhausting stunts in tight, debris-filled spaces, racing barefoot across shattered glass, dodging explosions, and navigating intense shootouts. The noise from blank ammunition was so loud that he suffered permanent hearing loss in one ear. Each day pushed his endurance to its limit, leaving him bruised, fatigued, and questioning whether he belonged in the genre at all. Off-set, he joked about quitting, but behind the humor was the fear that he was out of his depth. Promotion added more strain. Studio marketing struggled to position Willis as an action hero, hiding his face on early posters to avoid public mockery. Willis recognized the implication. They didn't trust him to sell the film. That doubt lingered, turning every scene into a private test he wasn't sure he could pass. Yet he continued, channeling his anxiety into John McClane's vulnerability, a man overwhelmed, battered, and fighting to survive. When the film premiered to overwhelming acclaim, the narrative flipped overnight. Willis had not only silenced critics, he had redefined the genre. But while audiences embraced McClane's triumph, Willis remembered the fear, the pressure, and the pain behind each moment. For him, Die Hard wasn't just a breakthrough, it was a battle he never expected to win, fought in silence behind the curtain. Even the most iconic heroes of action cinema carry stories the audience never sees, stories of exhaustion, disillusionment, and roles that weighed heavier than any stunt they performed. These 15 films remind us that behind every explosive set piece and every unforgettable line lies a human being navigating pressures far beyond the frame. If this journey into Hollywood's hidden struggles has revealed a new layer beneath the legends, then stay with us as we continue exploring the truths studios prefer to keep in the dark. There are countless secrets still waiting behind the velvet curtain, and this is only the beginning.